What's your worst dating experience? Met a girl on Craigslist. This was a long time ago obviously. After a few messages we set up a date at a bar downtown. I show up and she's already there with a guy friend. No biggie, I'm thinking. She's just playing it safe. They are at a 2-person table and the place is packed. They already have drinks, so I grab one for myself and put it on my tab. Her and her friend proceed to ignore me. Like I say something and neither one acknowledges anything unless I ask a direct question. Even then I get one-word answers with attitude. So I'll finish my beer, pay my bill and leave without saying a word. Later I get a barrage of messages about how I'm an asshole for sticking them with their own tab. He took me to see Cloverfield, kept putting his hand on my thigh with me putting it back in his lap. He stopped and I thought he got the message. Instead he tells me he's motion sick and we have to leave now. He staggers out of the theater brushing against irritated people in their seats. Outside, he pukes into the popcorn bucket while I stand there mortified. We go back to his car and he tells me he is too sick to drive for a while. I wait a bit trying to think of what to do when I notice him unbuttoning his pants. I ask him what he is doing and he asks if I want to kiss it. Got out of the car and went into the lobby and called my sister to pick me up. He was still sitting in his car when we left 45 minutes later. I agreed to go on a date with an older coworker from my first job at a supermarket. I was 20, he was 27. He took me to lunch and didn't let me order for myself. When the waitress came to ask what I wanted to drink, he cut me off and placed both my drink and food order. I hadn't even glanced at the menu yet. He proceeded by saying needed to meet his mom and brother soon and how we should get married and eventually have kids. Mind you, he didn't know a single thing about me. I quit shortly after that and he would message me on social media every now and then saying things like my then boyfriend didn't deserve me until I blocked him everywhere. First date with a guy from the gym. Not only did he spend the dinner portion checking out the prom girls whose dates had brought them to the same restaurant, but after he was very excited for me to meet Pedro. He was insistent that shake hands with Pedro. Told me how sad Pedro was that I wouldn't shake his hand. Petulant even. Pedro was his penis. Was also my last date with Saint Hilaire and his friend Pedro. She ordered a steak to go, then sat quietly and waited for me to finish eating. She didn't want to answer questions, and didn't have anything she wanted to talk to me about. See you later, she said as I dropped her off. Not likely, I answered. I finally took a girl out I had been pining after for a long time. She had been in a bad relationship for about 2 years, had a kid with the guy, and they finally broke up. I waited a few weeks, and asked her out. She agreed. I picked her up with a teddy bear holding some flowers. She loved them and put them in water immediately. We went to a local sushi place, ate our fill and headed out for a movie. Watched the whole movie together in the theater, flirting and touching the whole time. Afterwards, we went driving around and just talked for about 2 hours before I took her home. We made out on her front steps for probably 20 minutes before we finally peeled ourselves away from each other. I went to bed feeling absolutely fantastic. Woke up the next day and texted her good morning. No reply. Whatever, she had a baby. Figured she was busy. Went about my day. Finally got in Facebook during my lunch break and she was back together with her ex already. Haven't talked to her since. My best friend set me up on a blind date straight after my divorce. I was 22, yes, 22 and divorced, and she told Mel needed a good man. She told me all about how this guy had a good job and he was so nice, blah, blah, blah. She would not tell me how old he was, and would only send me blurry pictures. I felt pressured, so I went. He was nowhere near as attractive as she had made him out to be, and much, much older than I expected. He looked at me and said, "She didn't tell you how old I was, did she?" Anyway, this guy proceeds to drive me around his property, which is huge and beautiful out in the country in TN. He takes me up on a mountain on a four-wheeler and proceeds to try to kiss me. I, being terrified I might be murdered out here in the middle of nowhere, he had brought a gun along, let him, and it was one of the worst kisses I have ever had. He then took me down off of the mountain to shoot and critiqued my form the entire time. Then he proceeded to absolutely trash his ex-wife because she turned out to be a lesbian while walking me around the house they lived in and showing me all of her favorite places and telling me all the things she would do there. He then showed me the house he was living in with his brother, which was basically just a shack. It was awful. I now tell everyone she tries to set up about this experience, and let them know not to trust her. It was a date that wasn't. I put in personal ad in the paper, this was back in the day, and agreed to meet this guy at a certain place. He took one look at me and drove away. He never said a word to me, just looked at me and left. I was very upset when this happened. I guess he didn't like the way I look. Met a lovely girl over Tinder, we really hit it off and had a great conversation, decided to meet in person for coffee the next day. She showed up on time, looked just like her pictures and brought her boyfriend. A few years ago I met this girl on a dating site who was some sort of zookeeper. She worked with foxes or something. She was nice, friendly, smart, and hot. Had no clue how she could be single. Until we met up and I found out real quick. She stunk to high hell. All the time. It wasn't too noticeable on our first date, at a mini-golf place, but she certainly smelled a bit off. At our next date it was almost overpowering. I brought it up and she said, oh no, sorry, yeah, for the first date I scheduled that after tea, had 2 days off so it wouldn't be so bad, it's just that fox musk is impossible to wash off. Asked her if she showered before our dates and she swore she did, it just didn't help. I guess we didn't last too long. Showing her a video on my phone and my boy texts me, did you fuck her yet, and it pops up on the screen. Dating app, smallish town Kingston, Ontario. Go on a few boring dates. Q story. Match with girl, she agrees to meet but there was something odd about the conversation. She was eager to meet, suspiciously eager. I get to the Starbucks and wait inside for 20 minutes past the agreed meet time. Girl texts me, says she running late, asks me to stand outside so she can see me as she drives by. I look over and there's another dude standing on the sidewalk with his phone in his hand. Recognize him from the gym, ask if he's also meeting a girl, and what her name is. Turns out the girl was pulling a fast one on us both as revenge for her girlfriend who we both apparently dated once and didn't like. So him and Andy went to get ice cream together and sent her a photo of us having a great time. Wish I still had the photo. Pulled out her phone and started playing Clash of Clans. Sounds like you could make her your hogre. He drunkenly told me on my birthday after one date that he loved me. Then he called me a whore because I didn't sleep with him. Wild. Well, I had a crush on this guy in high school and my friend kept urging me to talk to him. I got the nerve to, and apparently he liked me too, or so I thought. We talked often and exchanged notes in the hallway. He asked me to homecoming and I said yes. I was so excited. Bought a new dress and everything. Got to the football game and met up with my friend. I finally saw my crush and told him I was gonna go sit with him for the game. He's like, no, you can't. I'm like, why? Him, because I'm with my girlfriend. I was devastated and embarrassed to say the least. Didn't stay for the rest of game or homecoming. Called my dad and he picked me up in front of the school where I was sitting all by myself. Started fine with a decent dinner. 1 hour later she grabs me by the neck, looks me in the eye, and says, I want you to get me pregnant. Feeling completely uncomfortable, I said maybe it's best we call it a night. On the way home, she starts screaming and yelling, then undid her seatbelt and began kicking the shit out of me while was driving her home. Pulled over, called the police, they came pretty quickly and fortunately took her home. Apparently she was on some kind of drugs and they kicked in right when dinner ended. What a night. I was 18 with a plenty of fish profile. Stupid, I know. Got catfished by this dude who was 15 to 20 years older. We met at Starbucks and upon seeing him I knew I was out of my depth but I didn't know what to do so I went along with the date. He would ask me my interests and then shoot them down. Ax, you love Harry Potter? Think that is so childish? I knew I needed to nope out but he kept insisting I go to his place using the fact he bought me a coffee to make me feel guilty. I agreed to go to a park but that was the most he was going to get. I said I had to drive separate as I had something later and during the drive I called a friend and asked them to call me in 15 minutes to give me an excuse to bail. At the park he mentioned that he knew he was older and maybe that was why I was acting strange and not wanting to see his great house, but he did it because he felt a connection and knew I wouldn't meet him if I knew he wasn't like his picture anymore, but I should give him a chance. Not long after my bailout call came and he became so cold it was scary. But I slipped off though after a very awkward hug and then endured texts of send me pictures of your party, send pics. I don't believe you, lol. Okay, I knew you weren't cool, you were a waste of my life. Y.I.K.E.S. I went on a date with a girl in college, cutie from my class who I had been trying to get to agree to the date for a while. So I picked her up to drive to dinner. and worth mentioning I lived in Wisconsin and it was January, so like 23 outside. Turns out she was bipolar but refused to take any medication for it, so she had a manic episode while we were driving, proceeded to undo her belt, open the door, leap out of the car into a snowbank and started running into the woods. That to chase her down and convince her to get back in the car with me before she lost her feet to frostbite. We didn't date anymore, but I was able to convince he start her meds and keep on them through all of college. She's actually a pretty successful software engineer now. Unrelated, but that is one of 3 times a date ended with me in a snowbank on a sub-zero night. Went out with a girl I met on a dating site. We met for coffee, got our drinks, sat down, and she forgot how to talk. For almost an hour, I would try to start a conversation and bring up any and all topics I could think of. I tried talking about our jobs, hobbies, families, anything really. Her responses were just oh yeah, that's cool and nice. She wasn't looking at her cell phone, looking out the window or being distracted. Completely forgot how to have a conversation while staring at me for the hour we were at the coffee shop. It was the shortest and longest date I've ever experienced. After leaving, I hit the McDonald's drive-thru and had a consolation meal to put that bad date behind me. Was about a month ago. I invited this guy from Tinder over because he seemed pretty nice and we had a lot in common. He was decent looking on his profile, so why not? For context, I had just moved into my apartment and I don't have a nice setup yet besides a table and a few chairs. The second he walks into my apartment, he asks me why I didn't have any slippers for guests. I was a bit confused, but figured maybe he lived in a fancier household than me, and yes, he made it clear he did. I said I didn't, and we went to my balcony to smoke a joint. He spent 20 minutes bitching about how much he loves and misses his ex-girlfriend. I tuned out and just nodded, but it was strange. We get back in and he immediately starts grilling me about my lack of furniture. Where's your TV? Couch? When I explained that I didn't have the money at the moment to buy nice furniture, he scoffed and just kept nitpicking. I kicked him out within 30 minutes. When she got mad at me for wanting to leave when all she did the entire time was mess around on her phone and post selfies of her and her coffee I bought. He checked her Insta profile later on. She wanted me to follow to boost her #S, and the caption was something like treated myself #blessed #so good #coffee. Literally couldn't hold a conversation at all. So self-absorbed. Wish I had video of that date just to laugh at it again. Invited a girl from Tinder over to my house after a very sexually charged conversation, led by her. After bringing her to my place, she proceeded to absolutely ignore me and at best give me one-word answers to every line of get-to-know-you conversation, acting like I was inconveniencing her by taking her attention away from her phone. Anytime I tried to make a move, got shot down instantly. This went on for a few hours. I put Netflix on. Just as I was about to say it's time to leave, with no warning whatsoever, she straddled me and started aggressively making out with me, and a bunch of food residue from her mouth got in mine. She hadn't brushed her fucking teeth. I noped out of that and we had a very quiet drive back to her house. Before I even left her driveway, she was texting me, saying how great it went and that she wanted to see me again soon. Needless to say, that did not happen. The actual date was a lot of fun. We got along well, and had a lot in common. About a week later I got a call from his wife. First date with a guy I met on a dating app. I sat down and he immediately was like, oh yes, you are hotter than your pictures and you're my girlfriend now. Came on real strong. I chalked it up to keenness at first, maybe a weird sense of humor, and figured LD at least stick around for a drink or two, feel it out. Even offered to buy the first round, partly as an excuse to get away from the table for a second. I made some unrelated comment to the bartender that made him laugh, and when I got back to the table, dude lost his shit. Wanted to know what said, whether I thought the bartender was good looking. Had somehow gotten insta jealous of this bartender 5 minutes after meeting me. There was no second drink. Years back, in my early 20s, I met this girl online. She seemed nice, geeky, into a of the same nerd stuff I was. Cute in her photos too. She dodged me several times about going on an actual date, but finally we set something up. She wanted me to come to her house so she could make dinner, watch a movie. We were both introverts, so that's fine by me. She said she lived in Houston, but it was actually over an hour outside of it, which isn't crazy because Houston is Uyug. When I got to her house it was actually a trailer in the middle of the woods on a wooded lot full of trash. Turns out they didn't have a trash service, so she basically just threw it outside. I saw cats everywhere, but it was cats and giant freaking rats. Still, RD driven an hour plus, and I was already there, so climbed up the decrepit deck and knocked on the door. When she opened it, the smell of cat urine poured out of the trailer and invaded my nostrils just as roughly as the Nazis did France. I get inside. Cats everywhere. Orange vats, brown cats, skinny cats, fat cats, old cats, young cats. Cats everywhere. I knew she lived with her mom, and I got to meet her. She was huge, like, huge. I don't know how the trailer floor held up, and when she got close to MNE, she smelled like straight up ammonia. The mom was cooking dinner for us, which was like pre-cooked frozen stuff. The girl dragged me to her room and attacked me like an animal in heat. I begged off to go to the restroom and the room was covered in cat shit and litter. Just box after box, the shower, and everything. I couldn't do it. I went and told her LD forgotten the flowers in my car and drove the fuck away as fast as I could. I met him on Grindr. 3 or 4 dates in, he's doing the dishes after making dinner. The topic of conversation gets to past sexual partners and I tell him that, at this point in time, I've only had 3 sexual partners. He says I'm sure they all had diseases. I reply, well we were friends long before we had sex. So I'll know them better than you and I trust them enough to think they would have told me this beforehand if they did. He throws the dishes in the sink and tells me well I know the gay community better than you. They're all fucking liars. Trust me, they all lied. And they all had diseases. I told him it was time for him to go home, and right before I blocked him on everything he texts me L ruined the date didn't one. Went on a date with a guy on Bumble. We made plans for him to pick me up and go to a local restaurant for dinner. It ended up snowing the night before and developed a layer of ice on top. I suggested rescheduling, but he insisted. He picked me up, and when leaving my neighborhood, he started to slide on the ice and ended up rear-ending the car at the end of my neighborhood. Thankfully everyone was okay. I was pretty shaken up, but we continued on with dinner and the rest of the night was pretty mild. The following Monday, his insurance ended up calling me and asking what happened. He still asked me out, but ended up standing me up. He claimed in his older age he tends to be more forgetful. He was 27. Met her through Match, I think. She was at least 10 years older than her pic, probably closer to 20 years older. She had scabs on her face and hands. Spent the entire dinner talking about her ex-husband and how he was still in love with her and how he would secretly leave her presents on her front porch like teddy bears, etc. Finished the meal and walked her to her car. She tried to lean in for a kiss, and I just turned around and walked away. Oh, there was the time a woman kept pushing for MNE to take some pills from her all night. She said single mothers only had themselves to blame for sleeping around, and asked me why I had so many minorities in my neighborhood. She eventually took some of those pulls at my place, attempted to rape me, then fell down my stairs when I kicked her out. After I kicked her out and blocked her on everything, she spent the next few weeks making fake accounts to harass me for rejecting her, and saying I shoved her down the stairs etc. As a 6 feet 2 inches male that has worked doors at clubs/bars. Never thought I would have a story of a woman trying to date rape me, but yep, I do. A few years ago I busted my ankle pretty badly playing soccer. Got a few pins in it and was on the mend. One female friend I had asked me out on a date. She knew I was crippled at the time and wasn't allowed to drive. She offered to pick me up at 6:30 am to go have a picnic at sunrise. Warned her that the picnic location had to be somewhere with little to no walking distance, cause I can't walk. She's like, Alg, I got you, completely understand. Well, to the actually date. I wake up, get ready and wait for her to arrive. 6:30 comes and nothing. Okay, maybe she's just late? No biggie. Sunrise happens at around 7 am, still no news. Get a message saying she missed her alarm, will be there at 8 am lol. She arrives. We drive to the location she had prechosen. Turns out there's a 10-meter walk on a track downhill. Me in crutches ain't going to make it down, let alone the trek back up. She's sad. We go to new spot. Wasps. We pack up, go to new spot. More wasps. We have this awkward picnic while freaking out about the wasps and she just apologizes the whole time. We're still friends, but it's always funny when we ask for bad date stories, We just look at each other and laugh. Had a first date with an undertaker's apprentice. Problem was, he somehow steered every topic of conversation back to dead bodies. Have you decided what to order yet? Well, I was thinking steak. Booty was eating steak when I got called in about bathtub girl, and honestly, it just makes me feel queasy now. What kinda hobbies do you like? I love photography. I always have to take the memorial photos of the deceased for funerals, but I sneak the work camera out to snap a few sunsets sometimes. One love your tie. LT really brings out your eyes. Thanks. Yeah, funny story. I was wearing this when we buried lawnmower guy, and he was wearing the exact same one. I was so embarrassed. It's hilarious in hindsight, and even a little impressive, but 18-year-old me was just sat there, thinking, please, for the love of Christ, just give me 2 minutes to eat these free breadsticks without making me want to puke. Guy was one of those that gets loud and animated in conversation. Had people staring. Then tells me his first wife was murdered and he is the prime suspect. But no, it was the cop that she was sleeping with who beat her to death. Cops trying to pin it on him to cover their own, you see. Next he tells me he lost his bottom row of teeth. And he admitted to whooping his dog's ass for eating his weed. I have a lot, but the one that stung the most was a guy met online. We got on amazingly well, had great chemistry and spoke a lot. He asked me to stay over one night and I agreed. Things went well, we got a little frisky and headed upstairs. At some point, he stopped and stood up, looking over me. He then signed, said he couldn't do it and he found me repulsive. He told me I was too fat for anyone to have sex with, and that he thought he was better than this but he isn't. It fucking stung, especially as I had been open and honest about people being cruel in the past. Somehow I ended up comforting him for an hour after because he felt bad. Social anxiety is a hell of a thing. I wish I had more respect for myself to just walk out. He offered to let me stay the night and he would take the sofa, but I left. Even typing this hurts, yikes. When I was 17 or so I found a guy who I had met at church camp over the summer on MySpace. Live in Northwest Louisiana and he lives in Northeast Texas. He drove to my house, picked me up. In my naivete assumed that nothing bad could happen with the guy you met at church camp. He took me to IHOP, sat on my side of the booth, kept putting his hands on my thigh, yelled at the waitress for some reason I can't remember now. I told him I needed to use the restroom and just left. Luckily I had just gotten my very first, very fancy Motorola brick cell phone, so I just started walking down the street and called my dad to come get me. It was at that point that I learned to never let someone who you really don't know that well learn where you live. Nothing ever came of it but some nasty messages, but was genuinely afraid for a while. I took a shot at asking this girl out from down the hall in my apartment. She says yes and we go out to dinner. Right off the bat we learned that we have a mutual connection. A coworker of mine was her best friend. Okay, cool. I'll order up a martini. She awkwardly orders a rum and coke. It was at that point I realized she either doesn't drink often, or she drinks way too often. Who orders a rum and coke to go with dinner? Anyways, 2 drinks and she starts telling me how she has conversations with her dead dog and how her dead father sends her text messages. Then, she informs me that she is heavily medicated and those meds shouldn't be mixed with alcohol. Another 10 minutes later, after I try to get her to drink some water, she is trying to pick food from the other table's plates and her boob is hanging out, straight dangling. I try to help her out of the restaurant to get her home. Some chads think I'm trying to take advantage of her, so now I am dealing with that. She ends up calling her friend and my coworker while LMN busy getting her a cab and tells my coworker that I got her drunk while she was on her meds. She is getting emotional now that she realizes I'm sending her home. Before she leaves she pukes down the back side of my shirt. I just bought that shirt that day. I ended up meeting my now wife at the bar that night while I was trying to drink off the memories of what just occurred. She thought it was weird that I had on a white undershirt, my pants were wet and I was holding a button-down shirt. To this day she still laughs at the stupid situations I get into. On our second date he expressed wanting a 100% power exchange 24/7 from the start. This means he wanted complete control of me, what I wore, where I went to college, etc. I support whatever safe, consensual BDSM people want to do, but that was a serious deal breaker for me. I think he had serious issues, and he wasn't funny. Went on a first date after meeting on a dating site. Phone calls went well. I thought, why not? We met at the mall. He proceeded to tell me how many kids we would have, and how he would spank them when they were disobedient. Guy was fully serious. It wasn't some kink. He said had to do it because it's what God wants. Now I'm a Christian, but, dude, no. He ended up following me to my car. I was thankful it was daytime in a busy mall. Security guard was watching too, and tried to make out. I knocked out and blocked him. Dating someone I really like but being way more invested than them hurts every time. I was in a ska band in the 90s, and we were opening for a well-known band in the scene. It was our third or fourth show, and we were feeling pretty good about the opportunity. We killed our set, and afterward I was out in the crowd mingling. I met this absolutely beautiful redhead, who was like, insanely out of my league. We wound up moving off to a quiet corner of the club and just talked until the club shut down. We exchanged numbers, made plans for the following weekend. We spoke 2 or 3 times over the course of the week, and it felt like there was a good initial connection. So, I went to pick her up at her place. I got there on time. She invited me in while she finished whatever she need to finish. She said something like, 2 minutes. So, I'm in the living room of the apartment, and I'm seeing all these pictures of her and another guy, and they look like a couple. I take a closer look at one of them, and the dude has a shaved head, and is wearing a flight jacket. Not completely surprising, as a lot of white dudes in the ska scene in the 90s rocked a skinhead kinda look, despite being fiercely anti-racist. C sharps. Looking closer at another image, the motherfucker had a swastika tattooed on his neck, and she's all snuggled up on him. Never saw her come out of the bathroom. I was fucking straight out of there, and never spoke to her again. I've got a ton of shitty date stories. This one is near the top. Met up with a guy I met on Meet Me. I got to the restaurant first and waited outside. When he arrived, he was extremely energetic past the point of being normal. When we sat down, I could see his eyes were dilated and unblinking. I assumed by that point he had done some sort of upper before the date. We agreed to 1 drink at this restaurant and then would go somewhere else for food. During the drink portion of the date, he says he can get me a good job selling cars at his business and then asks me to move in with him to piss off his ex-wife. To which I just chuckled and brushed it off. I told him LD meet him at the restaurant, and he followed me to my car, got in on the passenger side and wanted me to drive him there. I was a little freaked out but tried to roll with it. We get to the restaurant and the vibes are all off. I'm significant freaked out, so L used the bathroom excuse to ditch him and leave. I get up front and realize left my purse behind, so L asked the hostess for help. I told her to please find a way to get me out of the date. Fast forward about 10 minutes and a glass of wine later, the manager comes making his rounds to the tables, stops at ours and asks for my name. He said I had a phone call up front. Not the smoothest line, but I went with it. I said LD be right back to my date, grabbed my purse and hightailed it out of there. I went to block him on the app and saw he'd messaged me. Well, this is a first. Blocked him and I quit online dating after that. I took her to a comedy club. She had a couple of zombies, started talking too loud when the comic was on stage, staggered out to my car, and then while on the highway she started screaming at me to pull over. Then she threw up blue liquid all over the door and window. She came out as lesbian shortly after. I keep turning M. If I had a nickel a woman tried to convert me on the first date, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird it happened twice. First time was a Mormon girl who probably also thought I was Mormon, because after I said I wasn't she got flustered and asked if LD liked to go to church. I said no, and things got quiet and awkward and I left about 10 minutes later. Rinse and repeat a few years later just with some generic Christian girl. I try to avoid people who seem even a little invested in religion in their bios. I'm not here to get my soul saved, just sucked out. I was convinced by a friend to go on a blind date with her friend. Showed up and her friend was someone who was best friends with someone else I had dated but broke it off with. We just sat in silence through the entire dinner.